Carry On Screaming, one of the most hilarious entries in the Carry On series from 1966. It's a parody of classic horror films, blending British slapstick comedy with gothic monster movie tropes. The result? A uniquely memorable film, packed with outrageous characters and ridiculous situations that have made it a cult favourite over the years. Let's explore some of the most iconic and funny moments without spoiling the plot. Let's start with one of the most bizarre characters in the film, Kenneth Williams as Dr. Watt. This scene takes place in the living room of the creepy Watt mansion. Dr. Watt, looking uncharacteristically slumped, suddenly turns to Sergeant Bung and casually asks to be plugged in and starts fading away. The way Williams delivers this line with his signature deadpan expression is absolutely brilliant. Bung's bewildered reaction as he tells Albert Potter to plug him in adds to the absurdity. The mix of gothic horror with mundane, everyday technology is what makes this scene so funny. It's an absurd yet quintessential carry-on moment that showcases Williams' knack for making the surreal feel oddly natural. Next, we have the infamous scene with Oddbod, the hulking monster terrorizing the town. In a previous scuffle, Oddbod loses a finger and it's eventually found by Albert Potter, played by Jim Dale. Instead of some wild, exaggerated reaction, he calmly brings the finger to the police, where it's examined. But here's where it gets crazy. The finger doesn't just stay a finger. The police scientist gives it a zap of electricity, and it regenerates into an entirely new creature, Oddbod Jr. It's one of those moments that could have been straight out of a classic horror film, but here it's so ridiculous, it becomes hilarious. The idea of a monster regenerating from a detached finger, while the characters treat it with casual confusion, adds to the quirky charm of the film. Now, let's talk about the scene that made Fenella Fielding's Valeria an icon. Her entrance is pure camp perfection. Draped in that unforgettable red dress, she leans seductively towards Detective Bung and delivers the line, "Do you mind if I smoke?" And then, in true carry-on fashion, she literally turns into a cloud of smoke. Fielding's performance is a standout in the film, mixing sultry, over-the-top melodrama with impeccable comedic timing. Her scenes are filled with sly innuendos and that signature carry-on cheekiness, making her one of the most memorable characters in the film. Now, let's head to the Watt family's sinister cellar, where the real madness happens. Instead of the usual horror trope of a waxworks factory, Dr. Watt and his sister Valeria use a process they call vitrification to turn their victims, mostly women, into lifelike dummies. Watching the transformation process, which they casually explain as if it's no big deal, is both eerie and completely absurd. The concept itself is a perfect example of how the film balances horror parody with slapstick. These women aren't being killed or harmed in any traditional sense. They're just being turned into window mannequins. It's a strange, surreal twist on the typical monster movie trope that keeps the film feeling light and ridiculous. Finally, we return to Oddbod Jr., the result of that regenerating finger. His introduction to the film is another key moment that blends both horror and humour seamlessly. Unlike his larger counterpart, Oddbod Jr. brings his own brand of chaos to the story, and watching the interactions between the characters and this new creature is an example of how Carry On Screaming never takes itself too seriously. The film manages to get laughs out of the most outlandish situations, and this is no exception. In the end, Carry On Screaming is a perfect mix of horror parody and British comedy. The performances from Kenneth Williams as the bizarre Dr. Watt to Fenella Fielding as the seductive Valeria are spot on, balancing absurdity with deadpan humour. The film's charm comes from how it pokes fun at classic monster movies, while still embracing the silliness of the Carry On series. Whether it's Oddbod's regenerating finger, Dr. Watt needing a recharge, or Valeria turning into a literal puff of smoke, Carry On Screaming is filled with moments that will leave you laughing out loud. It's a film that doesn't just spoof horror, it turns it on its head, making it a comedy masterpiece that's still a joy to watch.